Howdy! Welcome to Cryptic Creatures, the show where I give you the inside scoop on monsters from mythology, folklore, and more. I'm your host, local monster nerd and master of karate and friendship for everyone, Mothmancha. First of all, hey, welcome back. I hope you like the new coat of paint. I've wanted to do something a little different this whole time, and I've been enamored with Home Safety Hotline for a good while now. So I wanted to take this series into a more visually interesting direction, away from the B-movie poster aesthetic. Here's hoping that I didn't screw it up in the edit. Secondly, I'm particularly excited for what I have today, because this is the first episode with 2 monsters instead of 1. I'll be doing episodes like this when we have monsters that, for some reason or another, are inexorably linked with each other. This episode, though, presents, I think, a weirder case than some others. This isn't a case of 2 monsters who are always depicted together in folklore, though. This is a particularly strange instance of 2 monsters that are, somehow, commonly mistaken for one another, to the point that their names have functionally become synonyms. My goal is to untangle this web of mixed-up monsters and try to single out the differences between the Basilisk and the Cockatrice. These 2 monsters are linked up together to a frankly frustrating point. When I was doing research for this episode, I would constantly find articles on one monster referencing the other, confusing the two, and let's be very honest, the pop culture appearances of both of these creatures are incredibly inconsistent. Cockatrice typically does evoke the image of some sort of bird, but basilisks can be snakes, lizards, or birds most of the time. So let's take apart the twisted tales of these intertwined twins and find out who is bird, who is reptile, and learn what's even worse than the male gaze. Oh, etymology section, my beloved. After last episode's on-the-nose name, I thought I almost would never see you again. No need to worry, though. We are so unbelievably back. Let's start with the basilisk. Basilisk comes from, unsurprisingly, Latin, with the word basiliscus being the Latin name for, well, the basilisk. We can trace it then further back to, again, no one's surprise, Greek, with the word basiliskos. Basiliskos refers to this creature as well, but it also means little king, being derived from the word basileus, meaning king or royal. This is the same root word for things like basilica and the basil plant as well, which is particularly interesting given that the basil plant is attributed to be an antidote for basilisk venom, though it was named because it was used in royal perfumes. The basilisk is referred to in this way because it is commonly referred to as the king of serpents, in part because of the crown-like crest it is said to sport on its head. Cockatrice, however, is a much more difficult word to trace back to. Contrary to what you'd expect, the origin of the term doesn't seem to have anything to do with chickens. Starting from Greek, we have the term ichneumon, which means track or footstep, and this gets translated into calcatrix in Latin, meaning to tread on or to trample. This evolved into the old French term Cockatrice, and as we'll talk about in a later section, this is actually likely the reason the Cockatrice was brought into being in the first place. Ichneumon, funnily enough, is also the name of an almost completely unrelated medieval monster, a slightly more fictionalized version of the mongoose or the weasel. The interesting thing about this is that these creatures were described as the main enemy of the snake and, as we'll also be discussing shortly, the basilisk as well, which presents a sort of interesting through line between the etymologies of these creatures. Before we start to try to differentiate the basilisk and the cockatrice, I'd like to pin down the few pieces of mostly consistent fact that we know about these 2 creatures. Once we have our baseline information, we can then try to figure out exactly which traits belong to which creatures. First and foremost, both creatures are always at least partially reptilian, if not completely. The basilisk, king of the serpents, is almost completely 100% reptile, although the type of reptile does differ between sources, even early on in the creature's conception. The cockatrice is usually, in comparison, some sort of hybrid reptile-bird creature. Commonly, the birth of these creatures is attributed to some permutation of a chicken or a rooster or a snake or a lizard or toad incubating the egg of one of the other animals on the list. Most often, it is the chicken sitting upon a toad's egg, which is how I learned that, scientifically, a bird and an amphibian combine to make a reptile. That's a real science fact. The most common ability attributed to these monsters is some sort of deadly gaze. Before researching this episode, I was mistaken in believing that this gaze was always petrification, though, which would mean that they turned you into stone, though this version of these creatures has seemingly only been popularized in the last 50 years or so. Most older stories simply state that their gaze kills on sight. They are also stated to possess some sort of toxin, whether it be a venom or a poisonous breath or something else. Like the Mongolian deathworm, some stories even allege that merely looking at the basilisk or the cockatrice is enough to kill someone because it is that toxic. Finally, the basilisk and the cockatrice are commonly stated to share some similar weaknesses. Often, the sound of a rooster crowing will kill these creatures instantly. Does this imply that the basilisk may have also denied Jesus 3 times? More commonly, however, the weasel is stated to be the mortal enemy of the basilisk and the cockatrice, being able to easily defeat these creatures in pretty much any engagement. Ancient medicine even implied that weasels had anti-venomous properties. We have our baseline for what we should expect from these creatures now, so we're going to start with the basilisk and try to identify what traits it is said to have on its own. Luckily, we have a piece of information that is the key to discerning the difference between the basilisk and the cockatrice, and that is that, at least in recorded history, the basilisk is much, much older than the cockatrice. Specifically, the basilisk has been around since the times of Greek mythology, whereas the cockatrice starts to show up in writing around the Middle Ages. A number of Greek authors wrote about the basilisk, most notably Pliny the Elder in his The Natural History. He describes the basilisk as a serpent first, and then goes on to say, "It is produced in the province of Cyrene, being not more than 12 fingers in length. It has a white spot on the head, strongly resembling a sort of diadem. When it hisses, all the other serpents fly from it, and it does not advance its body, like the others, by a succession of folds, but moves along upright and erect upon the middle." This implies that the basilisk is, even to the Greeks, a foreign creature, as Cyrene is a town all the way in northern Africa. It also implies that there was an incredibly small but also non-negligible chance that a basilisk could have been the one to carry the cross of Jesus.
Wow, if I had a nickel for every Bible joke in this episode, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Maybe petrification is the real reason they called Peter the Rock. Okay, enough chicanery. The basilisk is a serpent from North Africa with a crown-like spot on its head. 12 fingers in length probably means only around 9 inches if I'm using the right measurement system. Most sources actually claim the original basilisk to be fairly small despite its moniker as the king of serpents. It doesn't slither like most serpents, but manages to stay mostly upright while moving somehow. Pliny then goes on to describe how toxic the creature actually is. It is poisonous enough to kill plants just by touching them. It also has a venomous breath that is strong enough to break apart rocks. They can also commonly spit venom as well. The basilisk is so toxic, in fact, and this is according to a good number of authors, that if you were on horseback and were to stab it with a spear, its noxious poison would soak into the weapon, travel all the way up the length of it, and kill the rider holding the spear and the horse. In the poet Lucan's tale, we even see a warrior immediately cut his own arm off after spearing the basilisk to prevent the poison from spreading. Luckily, as previously established, there is a much easier way to dispatch the basilisk: the weasel. The weasel is so stinky, apparently, that it is fatal to the basilisk, although a fight between the two creatures would reasonably end in the demise of both of them. Pliny makes a point here to say that nature itself makes sure that there should be nothing without its antidote, that even the strongest of creatures has an Achilles heel. The basilisk's deadly gaze is only mentioned in passing by Pliny, as the basilisk is compared to another African monster, the Catoblepus, which also has a toxic breath and, again, can kill with a gaze, although the manner of death is not specified. Later in the text, we also learn that apparently basilisk blood can be processed and made into an amulet that defends the wearer against all poisons. Most of these traits are mirrored by authors as time goes on, with very little changes to the actual portfolio of the basilisk, but the basilisk also appears in very little classical literature overall, giving us a limited scope of the creature in the early years of its conception. Moving forward to medieval bestiaries is where things get confusing, unfortunately, because we have something strange happen. The cockatrice shows up out of nowhere! Medieval bestiaries do seem to give the basilisk another handful of abilities, though. The basilisk can kill others by just hissing now, giving it another name in that of Sibyllus, which means hissing. It can also cause hydrophobia through its bite, similar to rabies. Theophilus Presbyter and St. Hildegard von Bingen are two 12th century authors who provide the first accounts on how the basilisk is bred. They tell two similar tales. Presbyter describes the way in which a toad can be made to incubate chicken eggs, which hatch into male chicks that grow serpent tails. He then goes on, funnily enough, to describe how they can be burned alive, and their ashes can be combined with the blood of a red-headed man in vinegar, slathered upon sheets of copper, turning it into gold. Sure, man. St. Hildegard describes a similar tale, that of a toad resting upon the egg of a chicken or a serpent until what I'm interpreting to be Satan himself gives his influence to the egg, creating the basilisk. This depiction of the basilisk is that of a demonic, malevolent serpent that is so vile that nothing living desires nor is able to endure it, killing anything it runs into instantly. Its chemical makeup is so terrible that if it dies, the land where it rots will immediately become infertile, and any living things in the area will be perpetually sickened. Thomas of Cantimpré alleges that the ability of the basilisk to kill by a look is actually dependent on whether the basilisk sees the man first, which would cause death. But if a man were to see a basilisk first, the basilisk would die. Albertus Magnus offers a slightly different hatching procedure. Rarely, a rooster, yes, a male rooster, can lay an egg in a dung heap, which hatches into a basilisk, which again looks like a chicken with a snake's tail. However, he, in a slightly later book, describes the basilisk differently, like a more in-depth version of Pliny's initial description. A snake, about half a foot long, gray in color, with red eyes. It can kill by hiss or by its breath, and kills a man provided it sees the man first. It is easily defeated by the weasel and blights the land where it dies. Magnus, however, tries to actually refute the existence of this creature in some manners, and he recognizes that there is no way a snake can be born from a rooster's egg. And he notes that the two other authors who always write about their experiences have never actually written about the basilisk. There's an interesting story from Poland about the Basilisk of Warsaw. Some children are out playing in town and they decide to go explore an abandoned house's basement. When they do, they fall to the bottom steps and, well, die. After they don't come home for dinner, a maid is sent out to find them, and seeing them at the bottom of the stairs and thinking they were asleep, she also heads down the stairs and dies almost instantly. Their bodies are eventually extracted from the cellar, and their skin is swollen and dark, and their eyes bulge from their sockets. A royal physician declares the culprit to be a basilisk, likely killing the victims through its poisonous breath. A man on death row is offered a pardon in exchange for going down into the cellar to dispatch the basilisk, and he jumps at the opportunity. He covers himself in leather and mirrors, is armed with a rake and a torch, eyes closed tight, and he is sent down into the cellar. The basilisk is defeated and brought up to be seen by the public, and it is described as chicken-sized with a bluish crest, toady eyes, and colored all the colors of venomous animals. It is also implied that the victims did not die due to its poisonous breath, but rather its deadly gaze. I do think it's really important to note that, as I mentioned beforehand, nowhere in these early medieval bestiaries does the basilisk have the ability to petrify other creatures. Its gaze is simply said to just kill on sight. Like in the story I just shared with you, however, a lot of stories do refer to the basilisk as being vulnerable to its own gaze. Therefore, you're able to use a mirror against it like you would Medusa. I'll expand on this idea a little later, but for now I think we have a pretty good portfolio for our basilisk. As we established in the last section, the cockatrice shows up in recorded literature over 1,000 years later than the basilisk does. Specifically, the first mention of it by name that I was able to find pops up in 1382 in the handwritten Wycliffe Bible. This translation actually persists into the modern Wycliffe translation as well, where the cockatrice is mentioned 6 times. Let's take a look at a couple of these. Isaiah 59:5. They have broken the eggs of snakes, and have made the webs of an Araneid. He that eateth of the eggs of them shall die, and that is nursed or hatched shall break out into a cockatrice. Comparing this to some modern translations, I found one source that actually uses basilisk instead of cockatrice here, but it seems to be more commonly translated to something like viper. Proverbs 23:32. But at the last it shall bite as an adder, and as a cockatrice it shall shed abroad venoms. This, as with each other translation in the book, simply replaces cockatrice with another typically venomous serpent. I think that it makes this fairly likely that they were referring to the mythical basilisk, and calling it by a different name, which we'll get to in a bit. Two of the stories that referred to the basilisk in the previous section described a chicken with a serpent's tail, which is the main way that the cockatrice ends up being portrayed. Often, it is specifically a rooster with some sort of draconian or serpentine parts, especially the tail. Through this, we are led to, I think, a fairly reasonable question. If the original description of the basilisk was that of a crowned serpent, the king of the serpents, where and how did a bird weasel its way in? Let's first look at the writings of Ammianus Marcellinus, who described the ibis, this bird, well known for being venerated in ancient Egypt. Marcellinus described that the ibis would pick up serpents' eggs and feed them to its children, which was actually one of the reasons it was so sacred of a bird. However, Marcellinus also wrote that the ibis laid its eggs through its beak of all places. Not sure where he got that idea. That being said, if you saw an ibis with an egg in its beak and you followed and believed these writings, it might be hard for you to understand at a glance whether the egg was a snake's or a bird's. Hell, the ibis was believed to eat so many snakes through the course of its diet that some authors believed that they would just lay snake eggs. The reason I bring all of this up, though, leads us back to the idea that there was some sort of unholy combination of bird eggs being incubated by reptiles that the basilisk and the cockatrice both seem to be connected with. A reason people might confuse bird and serpent eggs is an excellent first point to go off of. Another potential point of origin for the cockatrice is this image by Ulisse Aldrovandi, which depicts the basilisk as having a beak. It of course has its little crown as well, but also 8 vaguely bird-like legs. Strangely enough though, Aldrovandi has a completely separate drawing of a basilisk that is strictly serpentine. Even at this point in the late 16th, early 17th century, we have this confusion. Perhaps more damning is this image from the 16th century by Marcus Gerards, titled The Fable of the Basilisk and the Weasel, which depicts what I think we would all consider a cockatrice. Now, the word cockatrice was, for a short while, used as a sort of catch-all term for various types of monsters, before the common depiction of the rooster-serpent hybrid was immortalized in public consciousness. My theory, therefore, is that the cockatrice came into existence more or less by accident. As far as I know, there was no place in recorded literature where we can definitively see the cockatrice appear, and even at its inception, it is confused with the basilisk, which has already taken on some bird-like features. The name it was given in French, cockatrice, combined with all of these facts, likely generated the image of a monster at least somewhat related to the chicken. And when the basilisk itself had so many different depictions, it isn't a stretch to say that someone saw the serpentine version and the avian version and assumed they were two different monsters, making it so. It's honestly a little sad, I think, that the cockatrice has no unique identity to it other than its looks. It very much is otherwise writing the success of the basilisk, and rarely, if ever, does it get to shine on its own given their similarities. It almost feels like an Echo Fighter in Smash Ultimate. It has its own identity on the roster, but the exact same list of abilities and attributes. Obviously, again, this is just a theory, but it seems to make the most sense to me. Somewhere along the line, the basilisk got confused with the name cockatrice, which spiraled out of control into birthing an entirely separate, yet definitively similar creature. Ultimately, what we think a monster is easy to change based on common public perception. Quick heads up, there will be a few images of snakes in this section. If that's a problem for you, I'd either scroll down and look at the comments while I yap, or go to the timestamp on screen now if you'd rather skip the whole section outright. People have been afraid of venomous snakes for centuries, and I don't see that not being a fear anytime soon. it's very easy to track down where stories of a king of the serpents might have originated from, because if you reference a North African snake that would be dangerous to be even anywhere remotely close to, it would be the Egyptian spinning cobra. The hood of a cobra would cleanly explain the description of the basilisk having some sort of crest, and although the toxin of the spinning cobra wouldn't do much damage to the skin, the snake is surprisingly adept at aiming at and shooting venom in the eyes of their targets from a length of 6 to 10 feet with surprising accuracy, and that is enough typically to blind someone. A pretty quick and terrible outcome, the speed of which might attribute to the basilisk's propensity of killing with just a gaze. Funnily enough, though, I already basically explained the rationalization for the cockatrice and trying to figure out its origin, so I'm not going to retread that ground here. Let's go ahead and keep moving forward. The malleable lore behind these two creatures gives us a pretty interesting breadth of unique takes on these monsters in various forms of popular culture. Some, I think, notable enough to cement their ideas into the common view of these monsters by many people. The most notable instance of this, of course, is the basilisk gaining a petrifying gaze as opposed to death on sight. The first instance of this that I was able to find comes from, well, Dungeons & Dragons, so let's start there. The Basilisk and the Cockatrice both appear in 1st edition D&D in the Monsters and Treasure booklet. No physical description is given for them, but it's simple enough to read their descriptions. The Cockatrice is a less powerful but more mobile basilisk. It turns opponents to stone by touch. The Cockatrice is able to fly. They are not intelligent. For the Basilisk, although this creature cannot fly, it has the power of turning to stone those whom it touches and those who meet its glance, but it in turn can be petrified by the reflection of its own eyes if the light is sufficient and it looks at a good reflector. The Basilisk is not intelligent. Later versions of the D&D Basilisk iterate further on the creature. They possess a potent venom and are much, much larger than the Basilisks of old, clocking in at around 6 feet long on average. These basilisks, however, are more reptilian than serpentine, having 8 legs in total, which brings us back to that image by Aldrovandi I showed earlier. Although further iterations have made this monster much more menacing looking, they do only sit at a challenge rating of 3 in 5th edition, which is very low all things considered, and 5 in Pathfinder, which makes them a good challenge for a lower level party. The Cockatrice, looking about how we'd expect it to, also shows up in newer editions, and it's even weaker than the Basilisk, making it an even easier challenge for the party. The Final Fantasy series, since it originally took all its monsters from D&D, has an incredibly similar Basilisk in Final Fantasy I, and then it appears as a common monster type as installments progress. They all have the ability to petrify opponents and usually have a very similar lizard-like appearance, except for Final Fantasy X and XI, where they're serpentine, and in 15, where we have by what all other descriptions should be a cockatrice. I do think that the take is interesting though. The Cockatrice, by the way, also shows up in the series, most of the time as a generic avian enemy that has a petrification ability, although later installments return it to its chickeny roots. Just like the Basilisk, though, one game, in this case Final Fantasy III, decides to make the Cockatrice a palette swap of the reptilian enemy type. Though to be fair, there was almost one Final Fantasy game in every entry that is, we'll call it off-model. Alright. To my chagrin, it is finally time to address the elephant in the room, or in this case, giant snake. I am certainly not the only one who was first exposed to the Basilisk through the Harry Potter series, and, in all honesty, it is the reason that I thought all basilisks had a petrifying gaze, as opposed to a plain old death gaze. As much as I'm not really a Harry Potter fan anymore, it's certainly the most popular basilisk in pop culture. If you somehow haven't seen this series, the Basilisk appears as a major antagonist in the second book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, where it retains its moniker as the King of Serpents. This basilisk is 50 feet long, and males typically have a chicken-like plume on their heads, so the basilisk in the book and film is female. This basilisk is pretty accurate to the original concept, at least ability-wise. It possesses a potent venom, and looking it in the eyes causes instantaneous death. Looking at it indirectly, however, petrifies a subject as opposed to killing them, and very luckily, every single person in the Chamber of Secrets who saw the basilisk viewed it in some sort of obscured manner, such as through a camera lens or through a mirror. Going back to the venom, The venom is so strong that it lasts for years after death and is able to seep into and imbue objects with its strength, just like how it could seep up a spear. It is so strong, in fact, that it can destroy a lich's phylactery, which is, by the way, literally all a Horcrux is. The only way to control the Basilisk is to speak in its language, but even then you need to be a particularly powerful wizard to be able to do this. All things considered, I really do like this version a lot. It's very powerful, it's terrifying, it feels like the king of snakes. And unfortunately, it's stuck in Harry Potter. Both the Basilisk and Cockatrice appeared as underutilized creature types in Magic the Gathering. Basilisks are green creatures that have some manner of killing creatures that block them, which is a good take on a Deadly Gaze ability, stated in-universe to also be petrification. There are 13 Basilisks and even fewer Cockatrices, 3 in total, again with similar creature destruction as well as flying. All 3 are different birds with a serpentine tail and meaner disposition. I really do like the Fleet Feather Cockatrice because it's essentially a Peacockatrice, which fits well given that it's from a Greek set. It's got this like Hera vibe going on. The Dark Souls series has these absolutely wacky looking basilisks with what appear to be giant eyes that are otherwise 4-legged monsters that are either reptilian or amphibious. Those aren't their actual eyes though, they have much smaller eyes closer to their mouths. They spit a poisonous breath that imparts an instant death status effect though, so they do keep true to an aspect of the creature's original mythology. These basilisks even continue to appear in Elden Ring and have generally the same abilities. Delicious in Dungeon has a more novel take on these creatures. The basilisk appears in episode 2 of the anime, or chapter 3 of the manga, as a large rooster with a second snake head for a tail. They are lethally venomous, and despite being mostly chicken, even down to how it is cooked, it retains the moniker of King of the Serpents. They possess no deadly gaze, and therefore the best method of fighting them is actually to flank it from both sides, confusing the monster's 2 heads. Later down the line, in chapter 34, a Cockatrice appears, being essentially a higher level, larger, more monstrous basilisk, whose venom causes petrification. The Basilisk and Cockatrice are common demons found in the SMT games. The Cockatrice appears generally as a chicken with a lizard's tail and more monstrous features and proportions, though, like with Final Fantasy, these depictions vary wildly between the various games. As expected, they typically have poison or petrification powers. Like Delicious in Dungeon, however, almost all appearances of the Basilisk also have it appear as a reptilian rooster, giving it similar types of abilities to the Cockatrice. As usual, these are only some of the many appearances of these monsters, since I can only cover so many each video without devoting a lot of time to saying, well, the monster can be found in this thing too. Typically, I like looking at the most common places monsters seem to be found, and then a few offshoots here and there. With all that said though, before we end, we have one new section to tidy up with, so let's move to that. Ooh, new evergreen section here. I'm going to put together my very own Cryptic Creatures bestiary as we go ahead and cover our many different creatures. Let's take all the information we just learned and distill it down into a more condensed format, shall we? We do always need to take public perception of these creatures into account when writing these entries, which is why they will probably be right at the end. Additionally, and more excitedly, I've been setting up a WIKIDOT site to host these creatures. That's crypticcreatures.wikidot.com. And it's of course in the description, updated with these and all past episodes entries. The Basilisk, origin ancient Greece, also known as King of the Serpents, Sibyllus, and often confused and conflated with the Cockatrice. Etymology, Greek, basiliskos, meaning little king. Physical description. Accounts of the basilisk's description differ wildly. More mythologically based basilisks are small, only being a foot long or so, whereas more modern basilisks seem to be larger and more monstrous. Male basilisks have a sort of crown-like crest on their head, similar to a rooster, whereas female basilisks do not. Although some are serpentine, many basilisks are depicted as having as many as 8 legs. Abilities. Basilisks are extremely toxic, possessing a potent venom so strong that a basilisk corpse would taint the land around it. Some have the ability to breathe this venom to attack prey. The most well-known and dangerous ability of the basilisk is its deadly gaze, which in most cases causes instant death, especially if the basilisk takes notice of its victim first. Some more modern basilisk's gazes turn their victims to stone instead of instantly killing them. More rarely, the audible hiss of the basilisk is enough to cause instantaneous death. Behavior. Basilisks are territorial loners, choosing a place to live and exerting complete control over it by being the most powerful creature in the vicinity, blighting the land around it through just its presence. They are aggressive and incredibly dangerous. Habitat. Seemingly anywhere serpents and/or fowl can be found. Witnesses report a toad incubating a rooster's or chicken's egg being able to spawn a basilisk, and they are most commonly stated to be found in Africa and Europe. The basilisk has 3 weaknesses. Hearing the call of a rooster will cause it to die instantly. Weasels are also the mortal enemy of the basilisk, and will not fail to bring it down, although it may be at the expense of their own life. Additionally, basilisks are not immune to their own gaze, so a mirror is a good solution to fighting a basilisk on your own. Cockatrice, origin medieval Europe, also known as, often confused and conflated with the basilisk. Etymology, French cockatrice, from Latin calcatrix, meaning to tread on or to track. Physical description. Accounts of the cockatrice's description overlap with the basilisks, but typically, the cockatrice is described as a type of monstrous rooster with reptilian features. Most commonly, the cockatrice is depicted with a reptilian tail, a serrated beak, and wings more akin to that of a dragon rather than that of a rooster. Some cockatrices stay rooster-sized, while others grow slightly larger. Abilities. Like the basilisk, the cockatrice is extremely toxic, possessing a potent venom in its talons and beak. It also possesses the same deadly gaze as its cousin, causing those who it looks upon to die instantly. Like its cousin, more modern versions of the cockatrice seem to turn their victim into stone as opposed to causing immediate death. Behavior. Cockatrices and basilisks pretty much have the exact same behavior. Habitat. The cockatrice also seems to have the exact same habitat as the basilisk. Weaknesses. The cockatrice possesses the same weaknesses as the basilisk. Hearing the call of a rooster will cause it to die instantly. Weasels are also the mortal enemy of the cockatrice and will not fail to bring it down, although it may be at the expense of their own life. Additionally, gazing upon itself in the mirror will cause the cockatrice to die. I know I do these for fun at the moment, but regardless, I do want to apologize for how long it took this episode to produce. It was largely in the writing department, as the script got rewritten several times alone as I kept finding new information or wanting to change and add things. Hopefully the next one doesn't take as long. As usual, please leave suggestions for any deep dives that you might want to see in the upcoming year, as I'm determined to make even more of these at a faster rate moving forward. I'm already hard at work on the next episode, so there isn't as long of a wait. Thanks for watching. As always, a like, comment, and subscription do wonders to help me in the channel. I'd love to keep making more of these as well as the other side content that I've been brewing. What do you prefer, the basilisk or the cockatrice? What is your favorite depiction of the creature? Write a 2 to 5 cents discussion post and respond to 2 others. Until next time, I'm Mothmancha, and remember, always make eye contact, unless it's with a vaguely reptilian monster.